Good afternoon, everyone, and we're delighted to welcome you back to this week's PMI Friday webinar. What makes continuous improvement continuous with Warren Knight? I knew I would do that. My name is Rich Seddon, and I'll be facilitating the session today, which includes running the Q&A desk, which we'll be using throughout the presentation. Please do keep your questions and comments, observations coming. It's really helpful, and I'll put them to Warren as we go through the discussion. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll send all registered participants a link via email early next week to the full recording of both the audio and the presentation. As usual, we're also broadcasting live on Facebook and LinkedIn, and new since last week, we're welcoming viewers on YouTube too. So to those joining us on the live stream, you're very welcome. To be able to participate in the polls, receive the recording via email, make suggestions for future topics, why not register at pmi.co.uk/webinar, where you will find, I'm delighted to say, October's schedule that has been published this morning. I'll take you through some details of that towards the end. We'll also be sending a short Voice of the Customer survey following the session. We'd be really grateful for your feedback. We're currently putting together November's schedule, believe it or not. We'd really welcome your suggestions, the things you'd like us to cover, the challenge you'd like us to set to our consultants to write the content to. They love a good challenge, Warren in particular. So thank you very much for all your support. And without causing any further problems or trouble, I will hand over to Warren, who's taking today's webinar. Warren.
Thanks, Rich. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this seminar. So today's topic, yes, indeed, what makes improvement continuous? So what we're going to cover, we're going to look at the current reality. Are we currently continuously improving in our organizations? So what's the challenge? How do we make this happen? Motivation, how do we get the various, the motivation for improvement, and therefore to round up, what's the implications for all of us as leaders? So let's start with the current reality. All managers dream of a situation where they're managing and leading highly competent, motivated individuals who are relentlessly looking for the opportunity to improve. This idea that improvement is just in the DNA of the organization. And there's this almost magical energy in play to drive us forward. However, in my experience, in reality, on a positive note, organizations are making huge investments in improvement programs which are delivering improvements. However, the data suggests that although improvements are being made, it's not necessarily continuous improvement. So why are organizations so far away from their dreams? Well, to start to answer that question, I guess, first of all, we need to explore and understand, so what do we mean by continuous improvement? So if we look on the web, there is a multitude of suggestions and descriptions of what continuous improvement is. From it's some kind of method or process, it's something about focusing on our products, our services, our processes, and this idea of, is it about incremental improvement? Is it about breakthrough improvement? So a lot of these descriptions and ideas are quite conflicting and confusing. So still I'm wondering, well, what is continuous improvement then? So for me, actually, it's not a method, it's not a process. Actually, for me, it's an outcome. When an organization is in a state of transforming, it's continually inventing and reinventing itself in response to ever-changing customer needs, in order to not only survive, of course, but to prosper. So therefore, what's the challenge? What causes continuous improvement? Okay, well, if we start with this model and this outcome that we want is continuous improvement, then this model suggests that what we get is driven by what we do, our systems and processes. So if we want something different, we've got to do something different. Okay, great. I agree with that. However, our systems and processes are a product of our thoughts, our assumptions, our thinking theories. In other words, our mindset. So what we get ultimately is driven by how we think. So therefore, I would challenge and say, actually, if we're looking for transformation in organizational performance, that's not going to happen unless we have a transformation in thinking. We have to think differently to get different results. Now, I'm not saying for 1 second that the systems and processes we deploy are not critical to success. However, fundamentally, the root cause here, in terms of continuous improvement, is about our thinking and our behavior. In other words, our culture. So how do we develop a culture of continuous improvement? Well, fundamentally, improvement is generated through people learning. Many of you will recognize on the right-hand side here what's often referred to as Deming's cycle, and is often referred to as a fundamental approach for improvement. But actually, Deming saw it as much more fundamental than that, and saw it as a way of learning, you know, the scientific method. So if we're going to create a culture of continuous improvement, we've got to totally invest in learning. That means we have to invest in both the capability and motivation of employees to learn, in order that they can excel in what they're doing. But I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, well, hang on a second. Warren's talking about total investment. But actually, we already do invest, often heavily, in improvement. And actually, I made that statement myself in an earlier slide. And also, we're talking about continuous improvement, but now I'm talking about continuous learning. So why make the swap? Okay, so let me see if I can deal with those things one at a time. Let's start with investment. So making a total investment. So this is much more than putting our hands in our pockets and paying. Okay, it's not more than a financial investment. This is about us as individuals, as leaders, and actually what we're up for as leaders, what we believe in, what we value, what we'll prioritize, and importantly, what we're prepared to do in terms of people and learning. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, you know, I'm already there, you know, and that would be interesting. So I think what I'd like to do at this point is to understand where you feel you are and where you think the leaders of your organization are currently in terms of whether they're making a total investment and commitment to learning. So here's a poll, here's a question for you. So in your view, how strongly do your organization's leaders demonstrate their commitment to employee development at a personal level through their actions? Answer 1, they don't. Answer 2, it's weak. 3, moderate. 4, actually quite strong. And then 5, very strong.
Cheers, Warren. I'm going to put that on screen just now. Give everyone a moment to read the question because it's a fairly nuanced question. Just to reassure, we've had a question already just around whether these poll results are confidential. Indeed, they are. In fact, they're anonymous. So yes, not just confidential, but anonymous. So do feel free to let us know. So hopefully that has appeared on screen for you. I can see people have started to respond. So that's good news. Technology is working. So have a think about that. I will shut up and stop talking over the top of you so you can think about it right now. Thanks. It's so tempting to talk right over the top of these. And those of you who have the misfortune to know me and have worked with me will know that that's something I do frequently. Okay, thanks everyone. I can see responses coming in. I'll just give that a few more seconds to see what we get, and I will remember to share these as well when we get to them. Just before we do that, just a reminder that the chat and Q&A functionality is available. Do let us know your thoughts, perspectives, questions, queries. One of the beauties of these forums is they are live, so we can put Warren on the spot and ask him really challenging questions on a Friday afternoon.
Thank you very much, Rich.
You're most welcome. Always a joy. Here we go. So I'm going to end that poll and share the results. So what have we got? It looks like most people coalescing around the middle, moderate. And I guess part of this, Warren, is context sensitive, as always, as all questions are. But what was it you were hoping to get by asking this question?
Well, it's more around, again, this idea of making a financial investment, but that how self-aware are we as leaders about what we're committed to and what we're up for? Okay, which goes, in fact, goes much further, I think, than simply the budget and the investment.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting that so we've got, if you add together, they do not, weak and moderate, that makes up roughly 80% of the score, which I think is pretty aligned with what I see.
Right. Okay. Cool. Thanks, Warren. Thank you, everyone, for responding to that, and do keep your questions coming.
Great stuff. Thank you. Okay, so now the second point I made was about why learning, why not improvement? Okay, well, actually, there, of course, is a connection between the two, as I've mentioned. But for me, I see learning and improvement on a spectrum. And what I want to do is to try and exaggerate that, to look at the ends of the spectrum. So here's some examples of the kind of things that I see in terms of learning. And what you'll notice from these examples, they're all examples of people personally learning in their roles. A line manager, considering a decision that's been made and the reasons why. A call center operator reflecting upon maybe a difficult call that they've just had to handle, and what went well, etc. What could be improved. And then on the other extreme, we've got improvement. This idea of very sort of scoped and sculptured initiatives and projects, typically delivered by small teams, focused upon a performance issue or a need for the business, applying structured methodologies and tools. So if we distill that down, what we've got at one extreme in terms of learning is something that's very organic, something which is very intrinsically motivated. It comes from within. It's unbounded. We all have the opportunity to learn in our work, every day, everywhere. And ultimately, learning is about me and how I do my work. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got improvement, which is much more manufactured, much more driven by the business, so extrinsically driven, focused, scoped, and very much on the products, the services, the processes, rather than the individuals, per se. So although these things are intrinsically linked, if we look at them from an end-to-end perspective, they can actually, in reality, manifest themselves in quite different ways. Oh, Rich, you've got a question for me. Rich, you're on mute, my friend.
I am on mute because I thought I wouldn't disturb you during your mid-flow. I'm now off mute. Hello. So yes, we have got a question, and it's an interesting one. It's kind of an observation and asking for your perspective, Warren. So In my business, we generally invest in projects that tend to be time-bound or event-bound. We call this continuous improvement. But what I think I'm hearing from you today and what you've been sharing makes me wonder if it really is continuous improvement or something else.
Well, thank you for the sort of perspective and question there, and you know, that's exactly what I wanted to open up here. Is continuous improvement something much richer and which happens or has the opportunity and is probably happening throughout the organization? Think of yourselves in your own roles, and you know, you don't stand still. You're constantly, you know, looking for opportunities to improve what you're doing and improve your performance. And so, yeah, I agree. If we're just thinking of it in terms of project-based improvement, I think we're missing a big trick, and that's the message I wanted to get out there, really.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. Yeah.
Great.
And please keep your perceptions, keep your thoughts coming. Please keep Rich busy. Okay.
Yes, do.
So on that point, now let's think about, so where does our motivation for learning come from? And to kind of get us to think about this, I'd like to offer a little bit of a story about myself. So a couple of years ago, I decided I needed to get fit, getting a bit older, and so decided to take up cycling. I mean, I can, since I was a child, been able to ride a bike, typically on a smooth surface, pavements, roads. But some friends invited me to try mountain biking. So this is obviously off-road, down hills, on inclines. And immediately, I found myself being challenged to get better. And like often with learning, I felt very, very real fear and pain, which is often associated, not necessarily physical. Some of it was physical in this example of learning. So I sought out support. I sought out new knowledge and techniques. I watched YouTube videos. I took out, I got a coach. I spent a lot of time reflecting upon my experiences and tested and modified new approaches. And actually, I started to achieve. I started to get better. My competence started to increase. And at every stage of it increasing, it was exhilarating. And the more I achieved, the more I wanted to achieve. And so my aspirations for mastery of this mountain biking started to grow. And actually, they're still growing now. I still would love one day to be able to do what this gentleman's doing in this photograph. Whether I get there, of course, is a different matter. But that aspiration continues to grow. So there's something in this, and I'm sure all of us on this webinar today is on a journey to mastery of some description, whether it be at work, whether it be at home and like a hobby, or indeed, something like, being a parent. And there could be many reasons that initiate or cause us to go on this journey and give us that motivation to start. However, once we're on that journey, the more that we accomplish and the more that we grow, the more that we want to accomplish, the more that we want to grow. It's self-sustaining, self-motivation. And I've always thought that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as shown on the right here, is a great example of that. So, those lower level needs, 1, 2, and 3, from physical requirements, safety, etc. Maslow suggested that as those needs become satisfied, our motivation to further satisfy them decreases. However, when we get to those higher level needs around esteem and particularly self-actualization, in other words, being the best that one can be, okay, actually, the more we achieve, the more we're motivated to achieve. This intrinsic motivation, if you like. So, okay, so how does this connect with organizational learning and therefore improvement? Well, here's one example. So I start off, new to my role. So I'm trained how to do the job, hopefully to a standard. And then I work hard to master the core elements of that job. And as I start to achieve and start to master my job, I'm obviously inspired to achieve more. And as I start to gain mastery over my work, I become productive. Okay, I produce good quality, and so actually, in a sense, because I've mastered my role, or I'm on the road to mastery, if you like, maybe it doesn't end. That I have more time, I have more space in order to find better ways of doing the job. And so therefore, I start to challenge those best practices, those standards, to see if I can find new and better ones. And so if those are captured, okay, and I think that's a challenge in itself, but if we're looking out for them and we're capturing them, then the standard is improved, the process is improved. Now, please, keep your thoughts, keep those perspectives coming. Rich.
Oh, yeah, I thought you'd frozen there, and I thought I was going to have to start presenting these slides, which of course I could do with no problem at all. So, Warren, we've got I think actually your next slide is going to address this to a degree, but it's a question referring back to the mountain biking example and the role of competition. So the example you were giving, the illustration you were giving, and motivation for yourself is in a sport. Lots of analysis has gone on, certainly in recent years, of codifying the role of competition in success. So what do you see the role of competition in motivation for improvement and continuous improvement in organizations that you work with?
Wow, that's a question. Thank you very much for that one. Let me give it a second. That's interesting. Right. So I think most people, I think, turn to competing when they have a certain level of mastery over their hobby, over what they're doing. So I think it just represents, again, and I think it reinforces this idea of Maslow's self-actualization, as in the more we achieve, the more we want to achieve, and I think that competition it represents a more formal recognition of that achievement and that mastery. And I think it's very much in that self-actualization and esteem part of Maslow's hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Interesting, though, I think, Rich, is I think if I look at it from a business perspective, I think this idea of competition is more about survival and prosperity. So I think it's much more of a base motivator.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. We just had a comment on that as you were talking there. The distinction between internal and external competition, and the potential for internal competition in continuous improvement programs to actually be self-defeating and non-systemic. You have obviously been trained by us. Thank you very much.
Wow, couldn't have said it better myself.
But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because there is always that balance, and what I think you described, talking about the mountain biking example, is your will, your drive to do better and succeed and become more and more competent. It's quite difficult sometimes to distinguish that, of not wanting to do better than others in the workplace as well.
And of course, we're always, the world, we're looking at it from almost a model perspective. The world is much more complicated, but I do love that idea of, it's back to, is that competition in some sense extrinsically driven, or is it intrinsically driven? And I really like that. I really like that. Fantastic. Thank you.
Cheers, Warren.
Now, thanks, Rich. So, and thank you for the question and comment. So, of course, I just want to go back to this story because it's not all a bed of roses. Like with many parents, I guess, I was so excited about mountain biking that I tried to encourage my young daughter to get involved and try mountain biking because I thought maybe she would enjoy it as much as I do. And so I recognize that this requires learning, it requires support. So I organized just the same kind of learning process development that I had gone through. However, one thing I didn't think about is that actually I had already I was already competent at riding a bike, on a smooth surface, whereas she had not actually mastered that basic competence yet. And so faced with now being, off-road on a hill, actually, she was still struggling with the basic requirements. So it actually worked in reverse. She was struggling to just stay afloat, if you like, and therefore had no motivation to improve. And actually, it was a bit of a disaster, really. And to this day, she still really doesn't like the concept of mountain biking. However, I'm pleased to say, and it's back to this idea of we're all intrinsically motivated in some sense or another to learn, to develop ourselves, to improve. And I'm pleased to say that she's actually now found a new journey of mastery in martial arts, and she's actually taking the black belt exam tomorrow. So I'm all fingers crossed for her. So what's the implications then for us as leaders? So it's about our people, of course, and it's about growing our people and developing them. But how? What can we do? Well, first of all and foremost, it's about investing in continual development to create continual improvement. Think, hopefully my example has sort of demonstrated and got us thinking about this idea of actually there can be no improvement if we don't have mastery over our work. And actually, when we're not masters of our work, in a sense, we're overburdened, and actually, we're under pressure. And when we're under pressure and we don't feel that we're performing, the last thing we're looking to do is to improve. We're just literally trying to stay afloat. And let's not just think that this is something that only applies to operators. This applies to in every job, in every level of the organization, from operators through to senior leaders. So first off then, as leaders, and we all lead in one sense or another, let's work to ensure that we're creating developmental goals for employees. And those developmental goals should actually not only encompass the ability to really be excellent in one's job, in one's role, but actually should go beyond that. And it's about encouraging people to be a rounded individual, to encourage people to leverage their natural hidden talents that they have, and to do that continuously throughout their career. Secondly, we need to create a shared vision for the organization, for the function department, whatever makes sense in the situation. And a good one is compelling. It motivates us to learn and therefore improve. Why? Because it presents us with some form of problem or challenge that is not simple. We can't solve it, easily. and therefore challenges us to really learn in a very generative way. So what I mean by that versus adaptive is, generative learning is when we're really getting out of the box, in inverted commas, and we're creating very new and different theories about how our work can be, versus adaptive learning, which is about refining our current theories. And of course, it needs to be compelling. It needs to be jointly developed. It needs to be something that we buy into. A third thing that we can do as leaders is to ensure that we ourselves and our colleagues are getting enough feedback. Feedback for me isn't just when one person shares some observations or some thoughts with another person. Feedback can take many forms. It's essentially any form of data, qualitative, quantitative, which is communicated back, okay, and is reviewed. So it could be a report, could be a temperature gauge on a machine, it could be that personal feedback that I just mentioned. And that feedback, and I love the quote here from Colin Humphreys, is essential to learning and therefore improvement. If we go back to the idea of Plan, Do, Study, Act, we need that data, we need that feedback to study in order to induce theories in the first place, but also then to be able to study how useful those theories are. So without feedback, we cannot improve. And to put that into perspective, it's even reflected in lean principles. You may be aware of the concept of going to Gemba, or the 3Gs. I call them three actualities. The actual place, go to the actual place, see the actual process or product or service, and gather the actual facts. And that's about generating real quality feedback. So, and hopefully we got a perspective on this now. So my next challenge would be, how do we ensure that we get that feedback? Rich?
Yeah, just to comment on feedback. Contributed here in the chat. So standardizing responses to feedback and the delivery of that feedback is one of our greatest challenges in our business. We find different people behave in different ways when receiving qualitative and quantitative feedback, sometimes risking the instances of tampering. Is that common, Warren?
Yes, I think it is. And it's useful you use the word standardization of feedback. Yeah. I mean, certainly from that sort of personal type feedback, I wonder whether often we're actually skilled in giving that feedback in a constructive manner. What I often see is we make judgments. You've done that really well, Rich, or you could have done that differently. But without data, again, without explaining, so what did I observe? What did I see? What was the impact of that? Then actually we can't learn from that. That's not really feedback, because feedback is data.
Yeah, and I think a further build on that, Warren, that I observed is the responsiveness and the way to receive feedback, and not so much in the qualitative sense, because that's very personal, but the way different personalities and different people respond to data that's coming out of their processes. See the previous conversation about competition, for example, can be very challenging when trying to get a standard performance review system to absorb feedback, voice of the customer, etc., into your process performance and therefore your continuous improvement program.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And of course, ultimately, it requires a great deal of thought, because it's a system in itself. We need to not only generate that data, we need to have a way of communicating it. Somebody needs to feel responsible for receiving it, for analyzing it, to make decisions on it. It's a system within itself. Yeah. And often requires improvement. So ultimately, yeah, I agree. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the comment.
So my next point, and probably bringing it now sort of a lot closer about our personal way of thinking about ourselves as leaders in our behavior. This comment from Mimi intrigues me. This idea that he believes that managers should be teachers. And I find it connects very nicely with a concept from Robert Greenleaf, which is this idea of a servant leader. And a servant leader is somebody who leads and successfully achieves because their dominant focus is achieving through the growth and development of others. So, in other words, I think of it like this idea of the leader as a teacher. And I think if you are a leader teacher, I think that can manifest itself in many ways. It's about encouraging and motivating employees to learn. So going back to this idea of a shared vision, challenging people, okay, to look for opportunities to learn. But learning is an activity. So we've got to create the space for people to carry out those activities. Coaching is a big one for me. A leader needs to be a good coach because we need to be able to help people to utilize all the wonderful, rich experience and knowledge and resources that we all have to best effect. I think also a leader teacher is somebody who is good at systems thinking, is a student of systems thinking, because to really help people to learn, we have to be able to guide them beyond the obvious symptoms to the more deeper root causes of performance in the organization. And here's a good final point on this about where do you find servant leaders? Where do you find leader teachers? You find them in the Gemba, because this can't be done from the desk. This can only be done where the people are and where the value is being added. So I'd be interested now in your thoughts, okay, about, so what about you? How much time do you spend in an average working week as a teacher leader? Okay, answer 1, less than 5%. Answer 2, 5 to 15. Answer 3, 16 to 30%. Then we're getting, up to the big stuff. Answer 4, up to 50%. And then answer 5, above 50%.
Okay, clearly these are approximations. Is the word I'm looking for.
Oh no, I want.
We're not expecting people to have very precise measures of these, but who knows? Some of you might have. So I can see people are starting to respond to that. Thank you very much. That's answers coming in. Okay, give that a few more seconds to make those choices. Anyone joining us on the live feeds, you can put your comments, your answers into the comments box. Okay, fantastic. All right, 2 more seconds and then I'll end that poll and we'll see what we've got. And there we go. Okay, so hopefully I've shared those now and everyone can see them. What do you make of that, Warren? And what were you trying to get a sense of here? What's this you were hoping this would tell you?
I think for me, again, it's if you relate to the thought process that I'm going through and this idea that, the opportunity for improvement exists very much outside of improvement projects, just improvement projects, actually in every day we have the opportunity. And I was just wondering how much we're aware of that opportunity. To encourage our colleagues and actually help our colleagues to develop and therefore to become masters of their role and improve. I think the results are interesting. Is always difficult because we don't know what your role is in the organization, and is it your job to do that? Is it not your job to, or you don't maybe feel it's your job? But it's an interesting spread throughout. But very much my point is encouraging that bit of reflection. And if you don't feel you are a leader, it's maybe not about being a leader, it's about leadership. And and within everybody's role, we have the opportunity to support our colleagues.
Yeah, thanks, Warren.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I mentioned earlier about that a leader teacher will create the space for people to learn. And I mentioned that learning is an activity. Indeed, it is. So, those activities include reflection and inquiry. So again, please keep your thoughts and perspectives coming. But again, another rhetorical question: how much time do we allow ourselves and others to just spend time reflecting upon what's going on around us and around them? The opportunity, the space to experiment and to try things out, into practice. And of course, leading that into, therefore, action planning and doing something different. So as leaders, we can ask ourselves the question, so when, how, and where are we going to encourage these activities to happen? And I think for me, picking up those bullet points at the bottom of the screen here, it's about being clever, and it's about how we integrate that learning into our day-to-day work, both formally and informally. Sometimes, so for instance, we might informally, rather than create an improvement project where everybody's under pressure to deliver a result, why not include also some think tanks or some communities of inquiry where people are coming together and inquiring and exploring for the point of view of research and learning, without necessarily feeling that immediate pressure to do something and make an improvement. Of course, book some time in to make sure you're giving yourself the space to do those valuable coaching sessions with others. But this one about building into management processes and reviews. And again, another rhetorical question, something to think about. We are all involved in many, many reviews, I'm sure, be it project reviews, be it team reviews, operational reviews. There's a whole raft of them, I'm sure. Question though, how much time is spent in those meetings reviewing what has happened in progress made versus reviewing what we've learned from that action? Leave that one for you to think about, and please do, give us your thoughts. So I've given you sort of many suggestions here about what we can do when as a leader or when we're leading. Focus upon the development. Create a shared vision. Okay, help make the time and space. Help to ensure that we're providing good quality feedback at the right time. Here's one which is more about and lead through thick and thin. Do these things through thick and thin. As Deming said, number one on the 14 points was create constancy of purpose. And look, I understand it's really difficult to focus upon these things when we are personally and collectively under extreme pressure to deliver in the short term. But if we allow those pressures to get to us and, we feel that we don't have time to develop ourselves and others, then what's the consequences of that? Well, what will happen is we will have inadequate competence and we'll have ineffective processes, which will lead to, of course, us being overburdened. And that overburden will do nothing but create wastes that will further devour our time and our capacity, which means we have even less time for development. And so what we have here is is a destructive cycle. And we have to find a way of trying to break that and turn it from a destructive cycle into a virtuous cycle. And of course, if we make that investment up front, then we can reverse this trend. So really coming up to the sort of final closing thoughts and points. So again, if you've got any questions or perspectives, then please do share them. So ultimately then, so what does that mean for us? Well, if we are going to be this type of leader, then we also, first of all, got to be a learner. Okay. So PDSA, this idea of the scientific method for robust learning and improvement, otherwise known as the Deming cycle, needs to be at the heart of our personal approach. We need to be able to, as I mentioned earlier, to be able to think systemically, to see the system. We do need to challenge ourselves to have an excellent understanding of not only our work, but of others' work as well, of the people that we lead in influence. And that very much comes from, the three actualities. Go in feet first, really experience the actual place, the actual work, and gather the actual facts. And of course, we need to be highly competent at deploying and applying improvement methodologies and tools in a structured way. And ultimately, of course, as it mentions there, have that desire to and motivation to support others in their development every day, everywhere, in every way. So in summary, for me, the engine room of continuous improvement is culture. And if we've got the right culture, then people and their learning will be highly prized, will be the most precious of assets. And so what we need to do is relentlessly, and I think that's a good word, encourage ourselves and others to really truly develop and excel at what we do. Because improvement, the route to improvement, is through personal learning and a mastery of what we do. And the reward, I promise, will be improvement. Rich, has anyone got any further
Yeah, there were a couple actually, which actually just kind of reinforcing what you were saying, particularly around the rhetorical questions you were asking didn't stop people from responding, and nor should it. Around making time for learning and considering what we've learned in the past. That clearly resonated. Several people commenting on that and agreeing that no, indeed, that is an afterthought and tends to be disguised as telling people off when things have gone wrong, which is unfortunately something that we revert to. Part of it is natural human behavior, which you can understand, can you not? To focus very much when things have gone wrong, it's painful. But how much of that can be converted into a learning experience? That your point clearly resonated.
And also, of course, and yeah, we're all human, definitely I'm human, and we do these things. However, it's kind of what we're doing is we're escalating the risks associated with learning. Okay, when that happens.
Yeah, well, yeah, indeed, I completely agree with that. And one of those risks is missing the opportunities to improve. So I've just got another one come in here. Sometimes the way feedback and questions are raised, the tool and the effective results and the purpose. Okay, sorry, just reinterpreting this live. How results are used and the effects and purpose of those results is often lost. How can leaders sometimes try and avoid that? And I think this comes back to our point around interpretation of data and the response to data that we had the discussion earlier on.
And I think there's something about, back to the point of, us as leaders, we need to be skilled. We need to have the necessary skills and analysis tools, and be able to use those tools effectively to really understand what the data is telling us.
And the range of tools, I think, as well, is the other key thing there.
Yes.
Yeah, there's qualitative and quantitative.
Absolutely, and of course, often we forget that the qualitative data, and again, I go back to, and I love this idea of the lean principles of the three actualities. Without that qualitative data, without seeing the situation with your own eyes, the numbers on their own makes no sense, because they don't have a context.
Yeah, cool. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Warren. So if you could just flick your slides on for me, that would be great.
Yes, sure.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for your participation in the event. Just before we close out, I'd like to draw your attention, for those of you who follow us on social media or any of our other channels, particularly LinkedIn, where you'll find the link in the chat to follow us. You'll see that we have recently launched 2 new products and 2 new services for you, which are, one is Room for Improvement, the video series, which is aiming to provide inspiration for people who are developing their business improvement capabilities. So tackling some of the big questions that Warren's been talking about today, but hearing from practitioners themselves, so people who have been where you are. Do look out for that. The entire series is available. We're currently on episode 3, which was released this week. Look out for that in our Knowledge Hub, which you'll find at pmi.co.uk. It's on the top menu, Knowledge Hub, also on the LinkedIn page as well. So if you don't already follow us, we are so close to getting to 5,000 followers. We're hoping to do it this week. Please help us by doing that by following us on LinkedIn. Do have a look out for that. The other thing to look out for next week is the second episode in our brand new podcast series. So you may have seen me messing around with my Google Nest Home a few weeks ago on LinkedIn, asking, and I won't do it because it'll trigger all your smart devices off, as tempting as that is, to listen to the podcast Leading for Business Excellence. We're really proud of it. Great new guests coming up next week. Second episode, and we'll be releasing those monthly, so do look out for those. Finally, the Voice of the Customer survey. In fact, not finally, I've got to tell you about the new episodes that we've webinars that we've scheduled this week for October. So before I do that, do look out for the Voice of the Customer survey. While we've been on the webinar, I've had on my other screen last week's feedback, where we get suggestions for topics. Not only is the feedback rating the content and the experience you've had, but the suggestions. So we've got things like dealing with difficult stakeholders, engagement in change, problem context diagrams as requests for November's schedules. So do look out for that survey. It's the final question on there. Put your suggestions in there and you can shape this series going forward. We're really keen to do that, so it responds to the challenges that you're having in your business today. So on the final slide is October's schedule. I can't believe I'm talking about October 2021, but it turns out I am. Next week, really exciting brand new webinar, Making Digital Reporting Effective. You'll see a really exciting case study in there. This is my colleague Dennis, who's leading that. That's based on a project that he delivered with a customer last year. As a lot of his thinking is around that. And he's sharing the learnings of building a comprehensive dashboard, electronic dashboard, from the top to the bottom, from the left to the right. Some really exciting concepts in there. So that'll be a cracker. Moving into process mapping and its benefits, building great working relationships, and learning to see. So again, reminder, do look out for the survey. Let us know what you'd like to see in November, and we'll get the challenge set to our colleagues as soon as we can. Finally, that brings us to the end of today's webinar. We'd like to thank you for joining us. So on behalf of PMI, Warren and myself, we'd like to thank you for joining us. Wish you a safe, happy and relaxing weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.